Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is July 4th. Happy July 4th. This is Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans, and this is the Level 1 presentation, which is going to be all about building the 10 dimensions. Let me just get this little thing, this little delicate sculpture. So this is lesson 3 of the series, and I spent lesson 1 and 2 speaking extensively about this shape and about the colors of the chakras or energy centers and about how they're nested proportionally. And last week was a big focus on this convergence point here, the singularity. And so it's also synonymous with the 0th dimension. And I spoke about and defined that extensively, but that's not the end of the journey, that's the beginning of the journey. And I don't feel like I did enough explanation of what are the other dimensions. And this also goes to the challenge of, we're talking about something abstract, like an abstract world that is not like what if you can see an apple, you can see you can see a cup that has water in it. Like, these things are easy to look at, easy to define. They're tangible objects, and we're talking about things at this point that are intangible. So it's also like, congratulations, because everyone who's in this class is super smart and very perceptive, and wonderful questions in the chat. So it's stuff that's like, it's a little bit slippery of concepts. It's a little bit challenging. How do we understand this stuff? So like I say this all the time, don't consider myself a scientist. I don't pretend to be a science person at all. I use these words that are of the science and math communities in order to build a common language so that we can begin talking about these concepts. It's just like if you're playing the piano and you're learning, like, okay, we're going to call this note a C. It's just let's just say it's just a C. That's what it is. And that's standard so that everyone can know when we play this note, we're talking about a C. So what I want to be is like, get everybody on the same page for this semester of defining terms. What do we mean? If we talk about the 4th dimension, we talk about the 5th dimension. What do we mean when we say that? So because I see these terms are used with rather loose definitions, and I think that it does a great disservice to the actual attempt to share information as perfectly as possible. And why do this? Oh, no, why do this? Why should I even try to share information perfectly? And the answer is, like, this is how we get out of here. Not like out of here, not like clank, clank, metal spaceship take me away, but let's say we as a collective and we as individuals are under duress. Like, it's not that comfortable here. And I share in the discomforts. I am an interdimensional visitor, or, not original inhabitant of this body and of this world. And I came through the genetic portal of the flying rainbow lasagna. And like, man, it's really challenging here. I'm not just talking about like, oh, like I got to get money so I can put electrons flowing through a wire to keep my electricity on so I can have lights in my studio. It's not just that. It's also the sense of what are the capacities of our mind and our perception here in this time and place? What are the stumbling blocks or inhibitors to full expression of genetic freedom? And all the time I do these dance movements. When I'm doing that, I'm talking about how visually, to beyond the flapping of the moving mouth parts, what are we doing on a subcellular level? That we're supposed to be able to make these wonderful arabesques and movements, these wonderful dance movements, and that implanted thought structures and limiting belief systems and many other pollutions in our world. And those pollutions, when I'm pointing around, it's like Wi-Fi, nanoparticles in the air, things that are impure in food and water, and like I said, even thought structures, that these are all impediments. Like, you're trying to do these beautiful movements, and instead it might become like herky-jerky, or it's like we're trying to move through sand, there's tons of resistance. So yeah, all of this is what I'm saying, I share in those difficulties and won't describe those difficulties in infinite detail without saying, hey everybody, I've come up with a solution, and the solution is this shape called flying rainbow lasagna. So no, people in this class are wonderful and incredibly supportive and appreciative of my work. But however, when I've been sharing my work more widely, sometimes people are like, they're like, she crazy, like that girl crazy. And I'm like, no, I'm not crazy, but I am trying to share these concepts that are hard to understand. And so someone might be like, I don't really understand what's going on, and I think that she's weird. And so I understand, there's like, but it's a bit of rejection. Like, don't reject this, because this is something that can really help you. But if you don't think that it's like you don't even want to try the lasagna. You don't even want to taste the lasagna because you think like that's too outlandish. That's too crazy. So don't be too intimidated. It's not outlandish. It's not crazy. And also it doesn't require, thank you, Teddy, for that. Teddy says crazy. No, Thank you very much. Literally, like this class is like my bubble of sanity, where I know like the people in here get it. So it helps me a lot to know that I'm not the only sane person, because there's a lot of social resistance, and I understand where that resistance comes from. I'm drinking water. Let me get to this great beginning question by Pedro before I get into my presentation lecture based on the lessons. So we're on lesson 3. For everyone who is enrolled and is following along, and I'm doing a lot of the same, like I'm doing a good presentation this semester. I'm not just going crazy like I did last semester and doing whatever I want to do out of order. So I am following or mirroring along what is presented in the actual lesson 3 of the recorded lesson. So now I'm squinting and reading. Pedro says, hello, I'm going to start with a question that I've had since a few days ago. We start the Merkaba, encrypt our DNA, and we can encrypt our mind, so no exterior thoughts come in. Is there something else we should encrypt? That's such a wonderful question, and thank you. Like, I really appreciate your clarity and the direction that you're coming from. You can encrypt photons. Like, this is what I've begun to do. Photons aren't merely light, you know, it's not just, or they're not just merely visual light. Like here I'm pointing to the light bulb. Yeah, that emits light, so we're all able to see and perceive, but photons are also aspects of consciousness, and they're coming from the stellar network. They're not just being generated in a star as science describes. It's like, oh, it's just a chemical nuclear reaction and it makes a lot of stuff and photons fly off. That's not all that's going on there. Stars are really more like portals for consciousness, and those photons, or pieces of consciousness and potential of time, are flowing through the portals of stars and being emanated and sprayed outward. And those potentials for they're like possibilities of life. Let me pull up one of the pictures that I use all the time. Oh, I got to go to screen share. Sorry. I'm forgetting what I'm doing here. Let me just show you a picture. Here we go. That good. You're seeing it. I know you're seeing it, guys. In this picture, and where I'm scribbling out here, this is all time. And I'll go back to my face here. It's made out of photons. So let's say the sun and the stellar network, they have their own music that they want to be playing. And that's like creating life, or creating life on a planet, or creating a particular biological experiment. And let's say that some of those intentions are being diminished or distorted in their expression. Like organisms aren't growing the way they're supposed to grow, or they're not integrating as an ecosystem in the way that they're supposed to grow. Think about the complexity of life. Like, think about just on this little old planet, what it takes in order to do something simple like, you know, grow some basil in your garden. You got to have soil, you got to have mineral structure, you got to have microbial and mycelium one-celled organisms in the soil that actually unlock the mineral nutrients. You got to have a plant that actually has life force energy in the seed. You got to have it sprout under particular circumstances. You got to have the sun and the warmth in just the right way. And you have to do that if you want an ecosystem times 10 million billion with all of these different plants and animals. It's like, it's so complex. It's the art project of the stars. So all of these photons that are coming off of the stars, you know, when I'm really in my flying rainbow lasagna. So I've done a Merkaba around myself. I mean, the basic answer is you can put a Merkaba around every single photon, and like if your computer, your system can process that much information at one time. It's like a computer having a lot of RAM to be able to do a big animation project or whatever. So here are some, and I would say everybody, like, work up to comfortable levels. Don't start off with, you know, 100-pound weight. Start off with a 10-pound weight and then work up to comfortable levels, but greater and greater levels of complexity. So here are some suggestions about what further encryption you can do. I put an encryption around my digital presence, you know, everything that I do on the computer. And that encryption is not merely, you know, on my actual computer system. You got to unlock it with a password or with your thumbprint or something like that. But I recognize, like, what we are doing in terms of participating in videos, or anybody that's, you know, in a chat or whatever. Like, I think only when I go to screen share, it has like a little sidebar that shows who's tuned in. But whatever, like, you do videos, if you're on social media, if you're whatever, it's like a vulnerability. You're opening yourself up to a way that people who are malevolent would be like, oh, good, like, I see you there, now I want to punch you in the face. So it's totally appropriate to put a Merkaba or an encryption, an energetic encryption around your image or your thought structure or whatever your voice, whatever you're sharing in the digital world, all of your emails, everything that you're writing. And this is beyond, like beyond computer level encryption. I'm talking about in terms of events, in terms of energy. And this helps to put a blockade, an appropriate boundary. So one of the things about these malevolent beings is that they go against boundaries, and they will try to be like, oh, look, like your door is open, I'm just coming in. Like if you just left your front door unlocked, be like, you left it unlocked, it's tacit consent, I'm coming on in. So it's really, really important energetically in the body. And energetically is also synonymous with genetically, because our genes are these antenna for receiving and sending out thought information. It is essential to not close down, not lock down, but effectively shield, have firewalls, have energetic firewalls that prevent other beings from influencing you. And those influences, can be like trying to make you have a particular disease. All of those horrible pharmaceutical advertisements that are like, do you have this, this, and this? Well, you might have this, and then you need to take this pill. Like, those are all horrible. First, they implant, the fear of a particular disease, and then they will sell you the cure. It's, very, very obvious of what's going on. So one of the things that if you have any online banking or cryptocurrency or anything of value that you store online, or how about this, as an artist, if you're a musician and you have your songs stored up on SoundCloud, or if you're an artist and you have a website to show your paintings, all of that is your digital presence. And so just like it's appropriate to basically make energetic firewalls and shields around your physical body. No one should come inside your physical body without your desire, and around your mind, so that no one else is harmfully influencing your thought structure. And also your physical house. You can put shields around your physical house. Put shields around your digital presence. That's, anytime you might share a picture of yourself or your loved ones online, or any videos that you might participate in, or anything that you're typing, or like I said, online banking and other important stuff like that. Or if you run a business online, if you sell t-shirts or something like that through your website, put shields of protection around all these things, because there's hackers. So hackers would be an example of like, a physical manifestation of an energy attack, that someone is trying to get inside of your system, and maybe they might take your emails without your permission, or prevent you from speaking to certain people if your communication gets disrupted. So that's a very appropriate thing to encrypt. And like I said, I do different levels of encryption, from personal. You can do it around your dog. I do encryption and Merkaba around my dog. You can do it around your pets and your loved ones. And this is not, I would say, intrusive in any way, because you're literally connected, on a very deep level to these other people in your life. I'm very connected to my dog, and like if she got an injury, it would affect my life completely. So I'd have to pay for her medical care. I keep her safe. Before we go to the dog park, you should, if you could see within higher vision, be like, oh, look, that dog's got I put a little Merkaba around Cheeky before she goes and runs at the dog park, because, she's like running up to all these other dogs. You want all the kids to play nice. So that is the type of thing. And basically these are shields and protect. Encryption means no one else can get inside of it. The shield, or the Merkaba protection, is a protection against events, a protection against things that you don't want to happen. So if I, for example, put a shield of protection around my dog, it doesn't mean she can't talk to other dogs. She can talk to other dogs, and the best things are what happen in terms of that outcome. So nobody gets bitten, nobody gets, harmed or anything like that. Everybody has a wonderful time. That is the best expression of what can be done. So you can encrypt your digital experience. You can encrypt or protect your car. That's a really good one, because, hey, we are all driving these vehicles that have mechanical parts, and also, there's always the possibility for misadventure or accident. So, not only can a part fail, like, whatever, a flat tire or a belt or something like that, but you don't want a flat tire when you're going 90 miles an hour, like on a big giant freeway or something like that. So you can put shields of protection around your car and around the event of driving in your car, so that you will reach your destination safely and then be able to return home safely. If you ever have to have a flat tire, maybe in your own driveway, and you've got a jack that you can use to fix it yourself, like, may it never be, on a highway on-ramp, in the middle of the night, someplace horrible. Okay. And I hope that I've given enough, like, what are some other things that I encrypt or put shields of protection around? Anything that's important to you. If you have an upcoming business deal, like, let's say, you make pies and you're a baker and you're about to, meet a bunch of new people who might want to buy your pies. You can put a Merkaba of protection around that event so that no one's going to squash it. No one's going to like put the evil eye on it and be like, oh yeah, that's never going to happen because you're going to be poor your whole life. Like you don't have to accept that. And theoretically, if the rules of the cosmos are functioning perfectly, if someone sends out the desire to squash your wonderful opportunity, all curses get reversed. This is a big mantra that I've been saying lately because curse literally means, so let's define, well, I mean, I should do that in a different show. Dark magic and what it is, but basically a curse is taking away energy from. So you've got your own momentum and you're putting energy into a particular set of events, and if the curse is like, let's take energy away from that event. Like the energy might be like, I'm going to run a marathon. If the curse takes energy away from the marathon, then either can't train or you don't finish or you get an injury or something like that. It's like, oh, the curse took energy away from there. But I'm just mentioning this very briefly. I'll do a whole presentation about dark magic because I don't want anyone to fly off the handle and be overly impressed by the power of dark magic, which is at this point almost completely gone. Like it's almost completely powerless. At other times in human history, it was able to be much more powerful in terms of controlling individual behavior and events. But at this point, it is almost powerless because, remember, it runs on the gas of victimized and tortured consciousness, and everybody's getting flying lasagna. Everybody, all the prisoners are being let go from their soul cages, from their limitations, their genetic limitations. They're not running on their hamster wheels emitting energy anymore. So their whole entire corrupt empire is crumbling into itself. So yeah, I'll do a whole presentation on that. Wait. Back to what Brandon is saying. He says, one could imagine looking through Merkaba glasses. I love this. This is wonderful. Everywhere you look, anything is framed in a Merkaba. That is absolutely beautiful. And it's like it's totally ethical and appropriate to wish protection upon people. It's like wishing them well. It's like saying, oh, if you're going to start baking pies and sell them over at that store, I wish you well. I know someone who's opening a store and is doing all these things of like getting merchandise and, setting up with distributors and all of that. And yeah, like I send her good Merkaba of protection. It literally doesn't cost any money for me to do it. It's just energy and goodwill. And we can do this towards one another. Like this is, and also let me say this about Merkaba, and then I'll get on to the lesson 1 stuff. That's like basic stuff. In ancient Atlantis, this is like kindergarten level stuff. Not that I'm condescending to anyone in this time and place, but it's understanding it's like the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. It is that foundation upon which we all base all of this. And if anything comes along internally to you and says, oh, the Merkaba, like, oh, it's so lame and it's already been superseded or it's corrupted or it's whatever, it's like, no, please don't. Because there will always be those malevolent beings that will try to be like, don't defend yourself. Your knife is puny. You're nothing. And it's like, no, actually, your weapons are incredibly strong and powerful. And I've found the Merkaba to be an incredibly powerful tool for personal protection. I think I told you about the bacon grease and other things like that. Merkaba around me, and I put the bacon grease into the jar that had a crack in it, and the whole thing, hot bacon grease, went everywhere, but not on me. Not a spot on my clothes, not on my face, not on my skin, but just completely all over the rest of the sink. So that's like what it is, the best possible outcome for events. Pedro says, in the past lesson, I asked about protecting with the Merkaba, and you told me I could protect each water molecule. Yes, exactly. You can protect on a molecular level. Back to your question. Since then, I've been putting a Merkaba on every molecule, atom, and photon in the universe. You're doing great. Now I will encrypt every photon as well. Wonderful, Pedro. Great questions. I appreciate your thought process. This is the type of thinking that we all, I encourage everyone to be doing. It's just like once you realize, wait a second, you've been given like a pencil with an eraser. That's like, wait a minute, I can actually erase out all this stuff that I don't want, and I can draw on all the stuff that I do want. That's what it's like when you get a tool like a Merkaba. You're like, wait a minute, I can put a Merkaba around that? Of course you can. Around that? Of course you can. I put a Merkaba around my garden. Guess what? Everybody else I know got caterpillars in their garden. Knock on wood, I don't want to get them. But I didn't get caterpillars in my garden, but I also I use essential oils and neem and other, things to keep the pests away. But I put Merkabas around each of my individual plants. So, okay, really wonderful start. I think that's very interesting stuff. Technically, that's advanced level stuff, but it's a one-room schoolhouse. Let me drink a little bit of water, then we'll get on to the actual presentation of the day. Okay, so last week I spent a lot of time talking about the singularity and the zeroth dimension, getting my magic tool of expression over here and going to the whiteboard. Let's see what we got here. Cool. So let me get a good color. This is the 0th dimension, a dot that contains everything. And in terms of building the dimensions, and let me also give a recommendation to anyone who wants to watch a really good video series. It is called Imagining 10 Dimensions with Rob Bryanson. I'll write out his name. Rob, I think Bryanton, oh, this is so hard to write with this thing. You have no idea. That's a T-O-N. Good, Rob Bryanton. I think I got it pretty fast. He's a very unusual teacher, and I really like the way he uses visual diagrams to present this information. He does it mostly from the science viewpoint, and I'm also adding in the idea of consciousness. So that if that's dot, that dot is the 0th dimension. And the basics here of developing common language for us to talk about all of this is that it's 0 because it requires 0 pieces of information to describe the position of a point or a person or a thought or a force in this zone. There's only one place. That is like infinity. There's literally only one place everything can be. So that's why it is not necessary to make any level of distinction. You need 0 amount of information to describe the position of a point in the 0th dimension. It's the only position it can possibly be in. And the most magnificent consciousness maneuver ever was what happened when this little 0th dimension had the revolutionary thought, what would happen if a little piece of me wasn't over here with me, which is supposed to be the only option of being anywhere, but was instead over here where I just made that X. That's the most wild thought that could ever happen. Because up until that point, everything is here where I'm making this circle. There's no other place. There's no elsewhere. It's like, oh, you know, if you're living in this house over here where I'm making like, you know, that little house, you know, icon around that dot, like there's nowhere else to go. It's not like, I don't like this house, I'm walking out. Like, where are you going to go? There's nowhere else. And so the first most revolutionary or transformative thought was this little 0th dimension. That's this point of consciousness. They had to think, what if a little piece of me was over here instead of everything being over here? And as soon as that thought happened, then we got what is known as the first dimension. And the first dimension can also be represented, I'm making little tiny dots, I hope you can see them on your screen, as a series of dots that join together the positions of the initial dot, which is here in the 0th dimension, the first position, and over here, the alternative position that a little dot could be in. As soon as that happened, that thought happened, a line was created. And the line is the first dimension. And it's the first dimension because it only requires one piece of information to describe the position of a point on a line. I'm going to change a different color over here. So where this little red X is over here, we only need one piece of information to say. It's like, oh, it's, you know, 2.5 dots away. And this other little X that I'm making over here, maybe that's whatever. I don't want to have to count that many dots. Let's say it's 7 dots away. So we only need to have one piece of information about where the dot is. And you can also see from this diagram that this line that sprung forward, it is 90 degrees in terms of its contextual setup to the original dimension. The 0th dimension and the first dimension, they are at 90-degree angles. I'm making a little right angle symbol there. So if we take that as that initial leap of consciousness, and then we say, okay, class, what is 90 degrees to the first dimension? And this is like, Aurora, we learned this in high school geometry. We know the answer. It's something going in this direction, and that becomes a plane. So I'm going to draw it again down here so it doesn't look too confusing. If this is a line, you know, you've got one infinite line starting from this dot over here and heading in that direction. What is 90 degrees perpendicular to that line? And the answer is some form of energy that is going in this direction. And what we have just created there is a plane. And a plane can also be understood as an arrangement of many, many, many lines lined up next to each other, kind of like pencils lined up together on a flat table, or like I'm holding up my hand to the camera, like my fingers held together in a flat, setup with no space in between any of my fingers, with my fingers all stuck together. So what we've got there is a flat plane. And I get to your question, hold on a second. Let me finish this part, the second dimension. So the plane is called the second dimension because now we have to have two pieces of information to describe the position of something on that plane. If I make an X over here, then it's like, okay, we got to talk about where the X is located in terms of this dimension, and also where is the X located in terms of this dimension. We have both the X and the Y axes that we have to talk about. So then we've got to have two pieces of information to be able to talk about the position of a point on that plane. Now let me get to this question over here. So Pedro asks, is the first dimension time? Technically, the fourth dimension is time. So we'll move on upward from the second dimension. So, here I've got this shown like a piece of paper as if we are looking at it from the top down with no distortion. Usually when I draw a two-dimensional object, I make it look like a trapezoid and that kind of, slanted shape. And I make it look like that because that's what we all look at when we, are interpreting like a tabletop. Like a flat plane is like a tabletop or like a playing card. I'm using perspective as a shorthand for being able to talk about what a flat two-dimensional plane is. So if we've got a two-dimensional plane like this, that can be like a sheet of paper or a playing card or a big giant piece of plywood. What everyone is 90 degrees to a flat plane like that. And since we are very familiar with the third dimension, we're third-dimensional beings, and we live literally in third-dimensional boxes, I know everybody can get this answer, and you're all really smart too. So it's this direction over here would be considered perpendicular to the plane, and we'll make the little there. That's the 90-degree angle of perpendicular movement. And what we begin doing when we go into that direction is stacking up planes on top of each other. So now I'm going to draw a whole bunch of pieces of paper, or playing cards, or whatever pieces of plywood that we're stacking up. And this is not the neatest drawing in the world, but it is enough for you to be able to see. You stack up enough pieces of paper or flat, whatever, pieces of cardboard, it eventually makes a cube. And the cube is a third-dimensional object. And that also, we'll get into 3 dimensions because we need both the X, that's not an X, there we go, the Y, and the Z. We need 3 pieces of information to tell us what is the position of an X in that format. But that's what I just drew with this little box there. That's the equivalent of one snapshot of a moment in time. This is like a frozen moment. This is not, right now I'm in my house, I'm in my box. I think you can see me in my little thumbnail, but I'm not frozen. I'm not like, if we had a person in here, here's a little stick figure with legs, and here's their little arms over here. If we have a little person inside of there, they would be frozen. If something is merely third dimensional, it has volume, but it doesn't necessarily have movement through time. So if that box, let's draw a proper box here. That cube that I just drew. And again, I'm using the magic of perspective in order to represent a third dimensional object using the flat plane of a flat whiteboard over here. So when people, okay, let me drink a little bit of water too, because this is like running a marathon. When people come to my studio, I go through this with them. I'm like, okay, let's do like the first dimension. That's like a line, it's like a pencil. Second dimension is like a piece of paper. These are very easy things. Third dimension is like the room that we're sitting within. Then I say to everyone, now I'm going to really challenge you. What is 90 degrees to the third dimension? And it's a very challenging question because the answer is not a spatial dimension. Everything that I'm circling here to begin with, the 0th, the first, the second, and the third dimension, these are all spatial dimensions. They describe the area of the phenomenon of experience that we would call space. And when we get up to the fourth dimension, we start to describe the phenomenon and the experience of what we would call time. So unless you are wearing a watch, where if I say, what's perpendicular to the third dimension, you could point to your watch, or you could point to a clock on the wall, and you could say, oh, it's time. But time is invisible. We're like fish swimming in a river, and the water is invisible. That's holding us up. That's propelling our fins as we move. So there's nothing to point to. So it's kind of a trick question. So I try not to be mean. I'm not trying to make a trick question, but the answer is you can't point to it. You can't point to the fourth dimension. However, we're experiencing it all together. Like right now, it's 2:36, right? We've been sitting in this webinar for about, half an hour or so. And we're not in the same bodies that we were at 2 p.m. Here, I'll say this is 2 p.m. where we started the webinar. That was a particular moment in time. And since then, we have subsequently jumped. Now pretend that each one of these squares that I'm drawing is actually a whole cube, because I don't want to have to laboriously draw everything. So I'm just asking you, allow me this little shorthand. Each one of these little boxes is like a cube, a moment in time. It's a room. It's a version of the room that we're each sitting in. And we have jumped our consciousness from 2 p.m., 2:01, 2:02, 2:03, blah, 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 all the way up to 2:36, 2:37. Hey, that's the present moment now. This is where we are right now. We have moved through time. Let me find a different color. We have moved through time from over here where I started that green line all the way over to here where I have made that green arrow, and we continue to move in this direction as we move through time. So the fourth dimension means a timeline. And now we begin to circulate back to the idea of a line. So everybody in this class, you're all super smart. What was the line that I described just a few dimensions ago? It's the first dimension, the first dimension where I'm making this big fat green line right here. That's a line. So it's like a pattern that goes, it goes point, line, plane, point, line, plane. And that is what is described very well in Rob Bryanton's work. So again, this is like common vocabulary in order to be able to talk about these concepts. So we begin with the 0th dimension, which is one dot. It grows into a line. That line gets lined up. Can you even see this green color? Many, many, many lines lined up next to each other make a plane. Many, many, many planes stacked up on top of each other make a cube. And then many, many cubes get lined up next to one another and they make a line. And that is how this continues onward, technically, what can be called an infinite journey of complexity. So the 4th dimension, and now let me write this out properly. Let's see if I can erase. I want to erase this so that you don't get confused because it says 2 p.m. Go back to this. And I want this to say, here, right, draw. Okay, right, draw the right thing. This is the 4th dimension. That's not right. Okay, sorry. I wanted to find a line. Oh my goodness, it's very hard sometimes. The 4th dimension, wonderful. So, because I know a lot of people, they do blogs or they talk about this type of stuff and they're like, you're moving from the 4th dimension to the 5th dimension. And I'm like, I don't know exactly what everybody is talking about because we're all in the 4th dimension. If you're moving through time, you're in the 4th dimension. Like literally, if you're not in the same place, like if you were born in whatever, if you were born in a town in Idaho, but now you live in California, like you're not in the same place that you were when you were born. You have moved through time. None of us are still like, whatever, if you were born in 1975, you're not still in 1975, you have moved through time. Drinking. So I understand that the common, vernacular of saying, oh, you're moving in from the 4th dimension to the 5th dimension, it is intended to give the idea of expanded freedom and expanded clarity and a better capacity to be able to see and understand higher dimensions. That is what I'm going for when I talk about this, but we need to be more specific about what are the exact, what is exactly it mean with all of these dimensions. So humanity has been first, there's 0th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th dimensional beings. Just regular folks are 4th dimensional beings. Because there's also this whole thing too with like UFO cultish type stuff where they're like, let's worship the 5th dimensional beings. Let's worship the 6th dimensional beings. Like, please, like, don't worship nobody. Like, let's abolish religion. And also, like, they're just slightly more advanced kids on the playground. Like, they're not worthy of worship. So let me change to a different color, and then we'll go back into here. Let's find a better color you can find. So we just did this 4th dimension, which is essentially a timeline, right? And then what happens, I hope you can see this properly, if I line up many, many timelines. So that first, wait, rewind. This is almost can be considered like a train car, like a line of train cars. And there's this old Twilight Zone that someone turned me on to that I think that's what's resonating in my mind when I talk about these train cars. It was this idea of these little builders that were constantly building the next moment, like it was just existing as a potential that no one was inhabiting yet, and they would build the train car like right before you jumped into it. So this is like, you know, if the train station is over here where I'm making a scribble, and then this is, you know, where you're going to your destination. It's like one train car. But what the fifth dimension is analogous to many, many train cars. That's the worst line. Let me draw a better line. I'm telling you, sometimes it's hard to control this pen. Got one train. Let's draw another train. Here's another train. Here's another train. It's like they're all lined up at the train station, and we'll draw some over here too, kind of going a little off screen. So many trains are lined up at the train station that it actually becomes a train station plane, point line plane. So we did the fourth was a line, the fifth dimension is a plane. Hold on a minute, let me just make sure that everybody is muted. I love you all, but we cannot have the sound, especially for the YouTube recording. I've listened, I've done the playback, and I can tell what people are talking about. So I mute you not because I don't love you, but just because it gives too much confusion to be able to concentrate. Back to the whiteboard. So, okay, those green lines that I just drew over here are very much like the blue lines that I drew over here. Each one of these lines over here is like a train car at the train station. But by the time, so that time plane that I just drew over here, that is the fifth dimension. And it requires 5 pieces of information in order to describe the position of a point in the fifth dimension. So let's choose a color we haven't used yet, something that you can actually see, orange. Let's make this orange X over here. It takes 5 pieces of information to describe where that orange X is. And the best, so, but I don't want everyone to be too literal, because, you know, when I'm describing something here that is abstract, don't take this too literally, because I don't want you to think that the fifth dimension actually looks like a square or a box, because these actually, when you get back to me and you see my shirt or my artwork, it actually has everything to do with curvilinear forms. You know, I'm always drawing the time vortex. Oops, that is it's shaped like that. We've got these circular aspects of time that are going around in circles. So just like I've made it clear that the time vortex, when I'm making timelines, they look like a lollipop or like an arrow like this, but it's actually a spiral or curvilinear pathway, please understand that that is similarly true of an item like the fifth dimension. I'm drawing it as a flat plane. However, please understand that it's not square or rectangular, and that it is circular and spherical when we start to be able to put this together. Very good. Pedro is saying the box is the tri-dimensional universe. Got it. Okay, wonderful. So everybody's, you're on board, you're understanding. So also, don't be too literal. When I speak about the fifth dimension, it's not necessarily like, oh, like, you know, if you open a book and you look at all of the words on the page of a book, it's not exactly like that. So the best way I can describe it is, in the fourth dimension, what we have, it's almost like a French bread. Let me rewind a little bit so you can see things better. Fourth dimensional existence is like a French bread, you know, a loaf of bread. So here's the beginning of the bread, and here's the end of the bread, and each one of these moments is like a slice, you know, a horizontal slice of bread. And it's funny, you know, earth physicists actually talk about bread and the bulk. When they talk about slicing up time, they're actually using similar words. It's very funny. The fifth dimension would not be considered the shelf on the bakery where you have many, many French breads lined up. It's not actually that. The fifth dimension, and that's a big distinction to make, because everybody thinks, oh, it means like you've got all of these solidified lobes of possibilities, like an edifice within which you can experience something, a room, a solid room. No, 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 no. The fifth dimension is really more like a bakery. Here now I'm trying to draw like an oven. This is like the bakery where bread is made. So in you got, here's fire like in the back side of the oven. In a bakery, you've got sacks of flour. This is flour, and you've got water, and you've got other ingredients like salt and yeast and flavorings and good stuff that all mixes together to make a dough. And the dough is a sea of uncollapsed waveforms. So the waveforms would be, you know, shaped like waveforms. They're possibilities. It's uncollapsed waveforms. It's dough. It's imagination. It's potential. And what happens in the fifth dimension is that those loaves of bread go into an oven of perception and get collapsed. That's what I mean, collapsed waveforms from the potential for actual matter into actual physical matter. So the transition of the fifth dimension to the fourth dimension is the place where the dough of reality gets baked into the actual experience, possible experience slices of the fourth dimension. Before that happens, it is just a series of possibilities and probabilities, just like the pictures that I'm always showing you, the rainbows that surround and interpenetrate all of our physical bodies. These are areas of pure potential. So this is also pretty important because this oven that I'm circling over here, the oven, it's actually you. You are part of that apparatus of taking the potentials of the time field and through your own perception, pardon me on that, through your own perception and through the phenomenon known as observership. Here, like I'll draw some eyeballs. Here's some eyeballs over here. The eyeballs looking at the waveforms is like the ovens cooking the dough. And that is what collapses these areas of pure potential into actual bread that is baked that you can actually eat. So to be moving from the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension, this signifies not only gaining more freedom, it also signifies going from an area of defined possibilities and parameters, what I'm saying here in the fourth dimension, to undefined areas of pure possibilities that are uncollapsed waveforms. Again, this is an abstraction, so it's kind of conceptual, so it's a challenge to make diagrams and words that are truly accurate. But when we get the fifth dimension, so like what I just drew there, that's the fifth dimension and shaped like a plane, we can also say that it's like a record of all the things that ended up happening to make the fourth dimension happen. So if we look at a loaf of French bread and we were to look at it from a fifth dimensional perspective, we would say, okay, well, in order for that bread to be in existence, I'm looking at a field of wheat. And I'm looking at it over like a whole year, a whole season while the wheat grows. And then I'm looking at the harvesters coming out and harvesting all of the wheat. Then I'm looking at the grain silo. And then I'm looking at the process of milling that wheat. Then I'm looking at the truck that's traveling the wheat over to the bakery where it's going to be made into stuff. Then I'm looking at the combination and the baker, like, you know, the baker is combining all the dough together and making stuff happen. And then I'm looking at it being put into actual ovens. And then I'm looking at it being formed into an actual loaf that is something that you and I can perceive with our physical senses, or, you know, with the whatever, I want to say gross senses, but don't not, you know, use that term, but with the five physical senses of the material world. So to see fifth dimensionally, to perceive from the fifth dimensional viewpoint, like if this were a person that is an adult that you are looking at and you're seeing them from the fifth dimensional viewpoint, what you would see is not just this guy of the moment now, but you'd also see who he was last week. So let's draw that kind of like in perspective. In the background, that's who he was last week. And then you'll also see all the way going back to that guy as a little tiny baby. You would see that person's entire life trajectory all lined up, like just like seeing the wheat being grown in the field, that's the little baby being born, and then moving forward in time, like as we move closer to the camera and as we grow and enlarge in size in perspective, then we're seeing that whole entire person's journey. And then I'll get to your question and I'll get to the next layer of reality. I'll get a different color here. Here, this next layer of reality is the sixth dimension, and that's what happens when we add together or layer up many time planes. Just like we layered up many two-dimensional planes, like flat playing cards to make a cube, we layer up many fifth-dimensional planes of pure possibility in order to make another time cube. And when I draw this image over here, what I'm trying to get across is the idea that, you know, just like when you have layers of fabric, you can have a needle, like this is like an embroidery. This is like a quilt. It's a quilt of time. And you can have a needle, let's just choose a different color so you can see this a little better, that goes through all of these different layers. Look, I'm like a needle sewing thread. A needle sewing thread. I'm a needle sewing thread all the way through all of these layers. And what that means is this gives us a visual representation for beginning to understand timeline bleed through. So when I say timeline bleed through, what I mean is what you're doing in your plane of existence can affect other people's planes of existence, because this is all beginning to connect together on the level of pure possibility, like on that fifth dimensional and higher level of pure potential that is not yet collapsed into a French bread that you can actually eat. So this is why things like the slow motion disaster at Fukushima, let me drink some water. Slow motion disaster at Fukushima of emitting radiation, drinking, is an example of timeline bleed through. That because it's happening on a quantum level, radiation affects the quantum world. Because it's happening on a quantum level, the uncontrolled escape of radiation and high energy particles in our world is not only affecting our world, like if I put this X over here, it's not just affecting our little world, our little neighborhood, it's actually affecting some of these other layers of time, like this layer of time that's directly above us, and this layer of time that's directly below us. But you end up having a timeline bleed through. And that's like, oh, if you make this wonderful, like here's an interdimensional portal, like, you know, swirling off into the distance, and you're like throwing your trash into the interdimensional portal, it actually goes somewhere. And the front lawn of your neighbors, that, you know, where that trash is going, they have a right to say something about it. Like, here's your extraterrestrial neighbors over here. And they're like, hey, stop throwing your trash on my lawn. So when we begin to understand the interconnectedness on a higher dimensional level of events in seemingly far distant times and places, it then becomes ethically appropriate and effective to intervene. Because, hey, if you're having a nuclear war over here on this level of reality, that might actually emit timeline bleed through to my reality. Just like, you know, if you have different layers like this over here, if there are different layers of paper. You know, I'm an artist, I work in my studio all the time. Sometimes you use these types of pens or whatever, and you draw on the front layer. Guess who just arrived, everyone? It's boss time. Go back to my face. We'll have a boss moment. Hey, Cheeky's here. Hey, everybody. Just like in an art studio, if you've got a pad of paper and you use a giant black marker on the front part of the paper, you get bleed through into the other layers of reality. Cheeky, I was telling everyone that it's 4th of July. You're wiped out from the heat. You got your dog. Look at her. She's so tired. Got your dog bone. You ate your bone. She just had to have a little rest. And she's so funny. It's like, it's almost always an hour. Like, she almost always like hops in right before level 2. What a good boss. Yeah, Cheeky, I want you to know everyone in the chat is cheering. They're so happy to see you. You're a very, very wonderful participant here. She knows, guys. I just want you to know. She knows that you love her. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll go back to serious scientific stuff, but first we have to do fun stuff. And literally, like, Cheeky helps me a lot in that sense of, I'm very intellectual. I'm working all the time on these complex patterns. And sometimes she jumps in and she's like, we need to hug and kiss now. Like, we need to play. We need to do something that's not intellectual. So it's very, very good to have a little boss break, get out of the intellect, get into the heart. Sometimes we go for a little walk around the block, you know, not in the middle of a webinar, but when we're busy working hard on intellectual stuff. And then she's like, it's time to go play. Let's go play at the park. So, okay, back to heavy intellectual stuff. Let me go back to the whiteboard. Thank you, guys. Thank you for loving Cheeky. And she's great. And she says hi to everyone. She sends you all dog kisses. Okay, back to intellectual stuff. Back to work, everyone. So when you draw on the top level of a pad of paper with a big fat marker, and then what happens is that ink bleeds through to the other layers of reality. So this is also how we can understand that little yellow sculpture that I hold up all the time. I'm holding it up to the camera, but I don't know if all participants can see it. These are several different individuated life experiences all combined together, where we begin to understand your own personal life trajectory has an impact on what we would define as other people's lives, even though those other people are you in a different format, coming from a different direction, moving, you know, in a different way than you are moving. And it's still, you know, it's interactive, mutually, everybody mutually affects one another. So that's why this is so important to understand. And so let's also talk about fifth dimensional beings and higher, because I have a bit of a beef with some of the more, whatever, widely known New Age teachers that are talking about some kind of like, organism called a blue avian that they want to say that it actually looks like, you know, like, I'll go back to my face and we'll talk. That it actually looks like a bird with feathers and is blue colored. And that they were saying that that's the picture. They had this guy do like a rendering of it, of what a fifth dimensional being looks like. And as soon as that came out, I'm like that is not truthful at all. Like, you got to stop shining people on. When I present in this class, I feel confident in presenting because it's like, I've seen this stuff. I know this is true. Like, I'm not making stuff up. But when I see stuff like that, I'm like, they're making stuff up, but not everybody knows, because if you've never been to China, you don't know what China really looks like. So if someone comes with this crazy picture and is like, oh yeah, this is what China looks like, you might not know. That's not China. So P.S., a higher dimensional being would look like one of these paintings that I make. It would look like an abstraction. And there's a wonderful movie. Let me just drink here. A wonderful movie I highly recommend called Flatland. And it comes from a book that is from the late 1800s. That's a bit abstract, maybe a little bit not normal. It's a little bit hard to read and get through. It's very based in math ideas. The movie is very accessible because it's an animation, and it starts out with the main characters of the movie that some of them look like Pac-Man, you know, the old animation, or they might look like a square or a triangle or a rectangle. There's different characters that are different shapes, and they've never seen a sphere before. That is not part of their reality. They've seen a circle. A circle is like one slice of a sphere. You know, if you have like an orange and you cut it into horizontal slices, but they've never seen a sphere. And this one guy in Flatland has an amazing, transcendent religious experience when one day he gets visited by an actual sphere, and he wants to fall on his knees and worship. He's like, oh, divine sphere of roundness, I've never seen something so perfect. And the sphere is like, I'm just a higher dimensional being. Don't worship me. I'm not perfect. I'm not, I'm not in control of your reality. But he's able to see like I'll tell you, I'll prove that I'm a higher dimensional being. I can tell you what's in that locked cabinet over there. And of course, he can see easily what's in the locked cabinet because he doesn't have to look through the doorway. He can look inside in a higher dimensional way. So he performs these feats of perception that the Flatlander thinks makes him a divine being. And the sphere being is very cautious to say, I'm not a divine being, don't worship me. And that's like a good segue into, the sphere being alliance. Like, this is just nonsense. And it's nonsense that I find it personally insulting that it's in existence because it capitalizes upon people's ignorance or areas of being uninformed. It's just like if you don't know anything about a car and the mechanic says like, oh, like you've got a doohickey, you got to get a new doohickey and it's going to cost you $10,000. And it's like, I know that that's a lie. I know that there's no car part named a doohickey, and I know that that mechanic is just fooling you to get money. That is what I think about these blue avians and the sphere being alliance. It's not even like something cute, like, oh, it's so cute that they're getting it wrong on that level because someone's trying to take advantage of you or make money off of you or in other ways subvert you from your true trajectory by fooling you about things that you don't actually know. So I find that personal. I clutch my pearls. I'm personally insulted by the inappropriateness of anybody doing that, even though they might be like, oh, like I don't blame me. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just a person on a stage in front of a microphone who the people pay me a lot of money to speak about. Like, why are they talking about things that they don't really know about? So P.S. Thank you for my rant. Thank you for allowing me that mini rant. And the answer is, what would a higher dimensional being look like to you and me? A fifth dimensional and higher being. Would it have a face and 2 arms and 2 legs? No, it wouldn't. You know why? Because if it had a body, we, from our perspective, would only be able to perceive one slice of its body at a time. This is what happened in the Flatland movie. The sphere is moving like up and down through a flat plane, so it looks like a circle that gets bigger and smaller. Just like if you have slices of a round citrus fruit, and some of the slices are giant, and some of them are really quite small, and it's just because of where they exist on the sphere. This is normal for us. We understand the third dimension. We're third-dimensional beings. But to a 2-dimensional Flatlander, this is amazing. Wow, how can that be? I'm so unduly impressed. So a higher dimensional being to us would look like slices of a being. We would see aspect, but not the entire thing all at once, because we are not designed with our perception to be able to, up until this point, we have not been designed with our perception to be able to effectively perceive what a higher dimensional being's true form is. P.S. That's because, and we'll get into level 2, duality, dualistic perception, I versus I, and the mechanics of our visual perception. In order to see higher dimensional beings, what we need to do is activate our inner eye, our higher perception, beyond the physical, beyond the, I keep wanting to use the word gross, but not like disgusting gross, but like the based in mass. We're not just doing what is based in the realm of matter and mass. We are perceiving time and energy as well. So also, like Flatland, do not be unduly impressed by the sphericality of the perfect sphere. It's just a higher dimensional being. That's why I say, like, kids that are on the playground. You know, if you're a kindergartner and the first graders are always giving you noogies, this is what's going on with the occupiers of the interstices, the turds. They're always giving humanity noogies. And there are second graders, and there are third graders, and there are even fifth graders on the playground. And the fifth graders on the playground are not gods to be worshipped either. They are beings that have gone through their level of education and development, and they are further along in their maturation process. That is what the fifth dimension is. And the fifth dimension also means that in terms of personal perspective, you're able to see the combinations of events that have different combinations have led to different outcomes. So I use the example of like a river that is flowing. Let's go to the whiteboard. It's always a challenge for me to be able to draw while I'm also holding on to my little boss over here, but I'm going to do it. If we have a river flowing in this direction, but let's say at a certain point, the river changes course. And then the river starts to flow like this, like maybe it flows around a big giant rock or something like that. And if you're fifth dimensional and higher, you can see, oh, the river used to have this direct course. And then at a certain point, it changed. I'll change colors so that you can really get this. It changed, and now it's where this dark blue line goes. And then maybe in 10 years, the river changes again. And then all of a sudden it wiggles like this, and then that's the new state of the river. So having a fifth dimensional, but it's always the same destination where I'm making this scribble. The river always goes to the same place, but there are different pathways to get there. So a fifth dimensional and higher being is able to perceive in terms of viewing the river of time, to say, okay, this is the destination, the end result. But there's all these different paths. Like first there was the straight river, then there was the curve, then there was the S curve, then it changed again. Think about the different combinations of events that can happen in reality in order to give similar outcomes. Like, you know, the outcome is, let's just use a simple one, like you go out to dinner. But at one time you end up at a Chinese restaurant. At one time it is an Italian restaurant. At one time it is, you know, a completely different Americana, hamburgers and French fries restaurant. So there's different sets of variables that lead to that destination, but the destination remains the same. Or maybe a more impeccable example would be the destination is dinner at the Italian restaurant. And there's all these different routes in the city that you can take to get there. Like we can take the riverfront, or we can take the highway, or we can walk, or we can bicycle. Like there's all different ways to get to the Italian food restaurant, but you eventually all get there. And that's what the fifth dimensional and higher viewpoint is like. But this does not mean that you can philosophize yourself out of suffering, because there are many timelines where we die. Like I'm always showing you in terms of the time vortex. Here, hold it up so you can see it. And, you know, that whole membrane of death, that boundary that represents all the times that we die. And a fifth dimensional and higher being would be looking at us and our chakras or energy centers as these fields of possibility and be able to see all the times when we potentially died. But that doesn't, you can't, like I say, philosophize yourself away from the suffering. Let me just drink. It has everything to do with recognizing that those are very real lives. Those are very real experiences on real timelines. Because you can be like, hey, it doesn't matter as long as you ended up at the restaurant, right? But like, no, actually it does matter, because on that timeline, like you crashed your car, and on that timeline you got murdered by a psychopath, and on that timeline, like you never made it to the restaurant. Like there are all these misadventures, and they're actually misadventures of real suffering. So the tendency to worship higher dimensional beings, let's be impeccable and not fall into those traps. And also the tendency to, once we begin to awaken our own higher dimensional perception, perhaps overly philosophize the complexities and variables of the time field in order to not recognize suffering, because that suffering is very, very real. And I never want anyone to be like, oh, like that guy's dead, but don't worry, he's alive on other timelines, so it doesn't matter that he's run over. And like, no, it actually matters. It matters that he's run over. That's not okay. Let me get to the questions. Pedro says we would see 3 dimensions of his 5 dimensions. You got it. We wouldn't actually only see 3 dimensions. We would see a 3rd dimensional volumetric object moving through one timeline, which is the 4th dimension, one French bread, one finger. Like if the 5th dimension is this entire sea of uncollapsed, waveforms and possibilities, and the 4th dimension is one timeline, like one train following a train track, we would only see one train track of that particular entity. It's like one thread of the entire tapestry. That's not the whole thing. So here's another good example. There's this movie called Cloud Atlas. I'm just drinking a lot, I know. Cloud Atlas. It's a good book too, and I like the writer, and he also wrote another book I highly recommend called The Bone Clocks. The Bone Clocks is about intergenerational soul transfer, dark magic. We'll talk about that another day. But Cloud Atlas does a good job of getting people like you and me that are embedded in the 3rd and 4th dimension to understand the 5th dimensional viewpoint of many different multiple realities that all overlap, where we are playing different characters, but those characters share commonalities. So in the movie, there's different vignettes that are set in different worlds, and the characters that are in each different vignette are played by the same actors, but they have very different qualities. So there's the Mad Max world, there's the clean futuristic world, there's all these different things, just like, I've told you about the versions of reality where Cheeky is a Mad Max dog, and she wears like a studded leather collar, and she roves around with other dogs, wild dogs roaming the street, biting people's faces. Like she's good at her job in that realm, but that's not who she really is. That's what she had to do in order to survive. So we would see one version, one thread, one persona of a 5th dimensional and higher being. We wouldn't even necessarily see all of their personality characteristics, because their characteristics are expressed over time through many different vignettes. So Gala asks a really good question. So are orbs a 4th dimensional aspect of me or others? So I think let's define terms when we're talking about orbs. Some people do with digital photography. Since the phenomenon of digital photography has been invented, people have been using it almost as an intermediary to be able to, oh, we're hugging here, we're hugging, let's hug, let's hug. Oh, yeah, to be able to see and perceive higher dimensional non-physical realities. And I had a friend, she's a lovely person, but she has passed on back in Woodstock, that was very into capturing the orbs. And so I did a little bit with her. We went to like on a little walk in the woods, and we did some orb photography. And what I started to get the idea was that it's the camera is acting as a digital intermediary, because it's easier to, it's like happening on a quantum level. It is easier to excite the electrons in a digital pixel of the camera's eye to make it look like there is something there, when there's not something there that our physical eyes would actually perceive. Like everyone is using it like a magic looking glass to be able to see things that aren't actually there. So I would say if these are the same orbs that we're talking about, these orbs are, I would define as higher dimensional aspects of consciousness, but not something to be worshipped. And I would also say that it can be considered like like if I stuck my finger down into a glass of water and all you saw was like the tiny little part of my finger down here, you didn't see the whole everything and my whole arm, and it had to connect to a whole person and a whole body. So if we are seeing orbs, we might be just seeing the little tiny visible aspects of consciousness of beings that are much larger or more extensive. So but the question, I think that there's something also of orbs about the viewer, that this comes down to quantum observership, because when my friend, her name was Crystal, when she held the camera, she always captured orbs. And when I held the camera and took the images, not every frame had an orb in it. So I would tell her, like, you've got the knack, there's something about you. And I have some friends on Facebook that are also similarly very talented in being able to capture many, many orbs. Like it looks like it's snowing out in some of their pictures. And I think that there is something about their particular body, their particular genetic code, what they're thinking and feeling, that makes them an effective bridge between the material world and the manifestation of the non-material world. So Pedro says, please don't use so many negative examples. Okay, take me to task here. Maybe I bump into a pretty lady and go somewhere else instead of the restaurant. I like your way of thinking. Very, very good. So in Pedro's understanding of the fifth dimensional and higher attempt to find the Italian restaurant, there are some peripheral examples, yes, where you end up dead in a ditch, but some peripheral examples, Pedro finds the woman of his dreams and decides that there's something much more fun and interesting to do than, go get some Italian food or something like that. So I like that approach, because also I'm not in the sea of possibilities. When we really become abstract, we become much less judgmental in terms of whether something is good or bad. Like when you're in the physical body, you're like, yeah, like eating poison is bad and eating ice cream is good. But when you get into higher dimensional levels of perception, it's like, okay, like these are all just different weird flavors, all just different weird experiences. But again, don't use that as an opportunity to philosophize away real suffering. But there's a whole array of different flavors and possibilities that are apparent. So Gala says, yes, some are dust. Oh, in terms of the orbs that people find, sometimes it's dust on the lens or a lens flare or something like that. But I really have seen some amazing blow-ups of the pictures, and they look like entities. They look like little fairies or fireflies or something. Some of them look like they have wings. So, it's very interesting. Like, I'm not going to just throw it out the window and say, oh, there's nothing there. It's something like, I only got 1 or 2 orbs. My friend was a lot better at it. But they're formless, like they don't necessarily have form and structure like some of these things do. So we're not exactly there. Gala is saying, yeah, 4th dimensional finger. Exactly. That so also what we're all looking at right now, like if you're whatever your age is, if you're 37, we are looking at the slice of you in this present moment that is 37 years old. But if we pointed behind us down the time tunnel all the way into antiquity, there would be you going back to your birth. And then there would be ancestors we would be pointing. And that's when someone really can perceive multidimensionally and looks at us on a genetic level, that's what they really see. They see, you're this adult right here, right now. We can see who you were as a baby. We can see who mommy and daddy was. We can see who their ancestors were. We can see who they're connected to. It's literally looking down the time tunnel. And and again, in this way, you get a grander perspective, a much more expanded perspective. So then it's no longer about your particular journey as Johnny or Susie or whatever your name is in this particular realm. It's also, where's your consciousness coming from and where's your consciousness going to? And this is provenance of consciousness. We didn't just dump you here. You came from somewhere and you're going to somewhere. So these are all really, really good questions. Wait, here's another one. Pedro says, maybe your friend was transmitting smile for the picture and all those spheres were smiles. I think she was really good at what she did, actually. So maybe she had the knack. She knew how to communicate on that higher level. Let me go and finish before I complete this level 1 recording, going back to the whiteboard, because we got up to what the 6th dimension is. And let me keep on drawing, even though I got my little kid on my lap over here. The 5th dimension is this over here, and I'll get you a better color here. This, we could call it a time cube, but let's call it like if you stacked up layers and layers of tapestry, because we've already got the warp and the weft. When you have tapestry, you have different threads that go in this direction, then you have different threads that go in this direction. So you've got, many different timelines that are woven together to make even one plane. And then those planes woven together to make this whole entire time cube. And then what happens to that time cube? Well, it goes in a line, just like we've got this 4th dimension over here. So that was we got up to the 5th dimension was one flat plane. The 6th dimension is this embroidered cube. And then the 7th dimension would be many, many cubes lined up next to each other. So now all of these little black cubes that I'm drawing down here, no, not Saturn's black cube. I had to find another color I haven't used yet. All of these little cubes that are going along in this direction make another long French bread. And that is the 7th dimension. And the 7th dimension is the combination of many, many, many of these embroidery cubes of time lined up next to one another and changing over time. So what if if this over here is kind of simplified, let's say it's a deck of cards and you've got like an ace on the bottom and a jack on the top. But what if you shuffled the cards? Then all of a sudden you had an ace on the top and a 3 on the bottom. this is what's going on here in the seventh dimension. You might have time layered according, just like you've got those cards layered according to a certain order, but that's the order in this moment. Then you shuffle the cards and then you get the order in this moment. Then you shuffle the cards again and you get the order in this moment. So what we're noticing is a transition over time. It changes over time. It's not always the same. It changes and it grows. And then the eighth dimension would be if we made a plane out of all of those cubes that are changing over time. Here's a whole plane, a whole plane, a whole plane. So, you know, a good analogy that I use for this is, you know, old-fashioned movies, like a movie with a film strip, like what I'm drawing, this black rectangle over here. It's one long line, it's cut up into little tiny squares, and the little tiny squares are each one moment. And what would happen if we took a pair of scissors and we actually cut it up into lots and lots of squares, and we put it out on a big, giant table? Then what would happen is you would see the first scene of the movie and the last scene of the movie all at the same time. Like here's the first scene of the movie, you know, where I'm drawing this box over here, and here's the last scene of the movie where I'm drawing this box over here. And we are able to look at this whole entire table at once because of our higher dimensional perspective. That is what it's like to view time from the eighth dimensional and higher perspective. You are able to see all of the variables and the way that all of these variables work together and interact with one another and affect one another, and the way that they change over time. And I'll go back to my face. And that changing over time has to do with things that affect the time field. So what are some, wait, class. What are some things that might affect the time field? Oh, like flying rainbow lasagna. Flying rainbow lasagna, exactly. Like every time we do the flying rainbow lasagna, it is shuffling the cards of reality. It is transforming on a genetic level. This is why I say to everyone, I'm not insane, and you're like the particle collider. You're the Large Hadron Collider. You don't need to build an apparatus that's $1 billion or whatever. You, the action and spinning motion of your own DNA, your dance that you're doing internally, you are the Large Hadron Collider. You are transforming reality. So please do not acquiesce or give away your power when you see reality is changing in front of your eyes. Don't be like, oh, that guy over there must have pushed a button at a machine. Like, no, actually, you or someone else might have done a dance with their, you know, birthday suit very naturally and shuffled the cards of reality and transformed and made a new possibility. And this is what I'm talking about when I say every time we do this flying rainbow lasagna dance, we, like me and anyone else who's learning how to do it, and we're all doing, all organisms, mitochondria, we're all doing this together, we're shuffling the cards of reality. And it becomes so complex that there are so many variables, and it is changing so often, and it is so unpredictable in its pattern of change that it supersedes the capacity of the artificial intelligence control system from being able to constrain us. They can't say, oh, we know where you're going to be in 2 years, so we're going to go there and you know, screw you up, make it so that you can't do your thing. It's like, oh, we're dancing so hard that you don't know where we're going to be in 2 years. We're magical beings, like unpredictable beings. That unpredictability is a huge aspect of the strength of who we are as creative, you know, like divine little miniature fractals of God. So this question over here says, Pedro says, if your head starts to hurt, it's because your mind is expanding with all this info. Very, very good. That is exactly what's happening. You know something? I call this yoga of the perception. Just like if you do a regular yoga, you're like, okay, like I'm stretching my muscles, I'm stretching myself so that I can do more with my body every time that I do it. And it's the same exact thing with playing music on the piano. You know, every time you try a new song, you're like stretching your capacity a little bit, even if it doesn't come out perfect, at least you tried something new. And that is, I say, yoga of the perception. We are doing yoga of the perception when we go through this expanded understanding of what the various dimensions are. So yeah, when I say like we're like kindergartners on the playground, I'm not to demean us at all, our perspective and our experience here. It's a noble journey. We're on a noble journey, and you start from the beginning, and then you build and build and build. It's like building muscles or building the capacity to do anything. So humanity, all of us, we are perched on this precipice of having expanded perception. And we're only beginning to, I'm noticing this in human society, that most humans are only beginning to experience this, and they're beginning to see on an anthropomorphic level, which might be being able to see like peripheral timelines, different versions of your own life, like being able to start to see and navigate the time field. When we get to be fifth graders, we will be able to see all of these things that we've been embedded within, but from a higher dimensional viewpoint. So there's another movie I can recommend. It's kind of a Hollywood movie, like I don't watch a lot of movies or anything like that, but it's got good language that I can use to share this with you. The movie's called Interstellar. And in the movie, there's a guy that becomes an astronaut, and eventually he goes through a wormhole, and then he finds himself in that higher dimensional or fifth dimensional reality, interacting with himself when he used to be just a guy in his house. And he was always wondering, like, why are these books falling off the bookshelf? Specific books fell off the bookshelf in a very specific pattern, so that it left behind gaps, like in the almost like Morse code. It left behind, you know, like a pattern that he was using to talk to himself. And what is the good language that I'm finding that I can use is, you know, right now we're in this area of the time field over here that we would define as alive. We're circulating around over here. And at a certain point, and I don't mean when we die, like not dying the physical death, but just like this astronaut went through a transformative experience, a metamorphosis. He went through a wormhole, and then he was able to see his corporeal life from a higher dimensional perspective. This is what ascension really is. It's when we raise our energetic metabolism to the level of being able to jump off the surface of time. Because if you're a person, a pedestrian standing on the surface of Earth, you're like, okay, I can see 10 feet in this direction, I can see 10 feet in this direction. And if you climb a ladder, you can see a little bit further. And if you climb a mountain, then you can see many miles in many directions. That is exactly what our experience of time is like. Like we can, you know, remember the past a certain amount, and we can predict or, you know, expect the future a certain amount, but stuck on the surface of time, we're very limited in our perception. And when we get more energy and more height or, you know, perspective, this is what it means when I tell you mathematically. Adding an additional dimension means adding an additional degree of freedom. When you can jump off the surface of time, like if you can jump a little bit, you get a little bit more free. If you can jump a lot, you get a lot more free. Because all of a sudden you can see many miles in every direction. You can see, oh, all of those things that happened in the past and all of those things that will happen in the future. So if I talk about, you know, the ancient antediluvian world, that's because I jumped off the surface of time and I looked around and I'm like, oh, that's what happened way back there. And that's what I talk about. And I would encourage, I'm the type of teacher that only really wants everyone else who's doing this work to activate your own telescope. Don't take my word for it. Go see, look at that landscape on your own, activate your higher faculties. And so lesson 5 is really about that meditation and forming fuel for the higher faculties and how to activate the higher faculties. And also, just like Pedro, we were saying, like this is yoga of the perception. You don't try to do it all in one day. That is not the approach of yoga. Not that I don't pretend to be an expert yoga person at all. And Chiki, let me tell you guys, Chiki is actually a very good yogi, and she does yoga every morning, but she's only got one pose. She only does the downward dog, but she's mastered that pose. So just like with yoga, you know, you do it consistently. And you do it a little bit at a time, and every time you do it, you're able to do a little bit more. It's the same thing with our inner development and with our ability to stretch our perception. That I'll return to this building the dimensions more and more times. And every time we do it, it's like, oh, that pose is a little bit more comfortable to achieve. That pose is a little bit more comfortable to hold. So it doesn't have to be done all at once. So this is the end of level 1, but I'll get into level 2. There you go, get into level 2 and talk about non-duality. So thank you. And I really appreciate everyone who's on this wonderful transformative journey with me and your thoughts and ideas and perspectives. I have wonderful chat comments while I'm doing this, and also wonderful YouTube comments. And I always say this, I promise I will reply back to the comments. And sometimes it just takes me a little bit of time to be able to do so, to be organized and have the computer time to be able to do so. So thank you very much. So on to level 2.